All right. Well, hello, everyone. Hello, I am Coach Tonya Wells, and I'm happy to be here with you tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about and that tough topic of holidays when you're not really dreading. When you're not really looking forward to the holidays, and maybe you're either dreading it. That might be a strong term for you. Maybe that's what you're feeling. Maybe it's just I don't know. There's just situations that you're not looking forward to. Or maybe you know someone. Maybe it's not you, but you know someone and you know the holidays are going to be tough for them. Well, we can speak to you too. We want to be an encouragement to you. I have with me today my friend Lauren Clayman, and she's going to join me here in just a moment. We're going to share some things that you might be familiar with, some things you may not, as it relates to learning how to plan or think ahead and move through the holidays more present than maybe you even thought possible. So without further ado, again, welcome, and let me bring on Lauren. Hi, Lauren.
Hey, how are you?
I am good. I am good. Thank you for joining me here today on Coach Tonya Wells Facebook page tonight. I do want to say for those watching and listening, even if you catch us on a repeat, we'll be uploading this to the YouTube channel so that it can circulate. And Lauren, this is all new to me using the eCam software, so we'll see if anyone does leave a comment. We might be able to see that, and we'll get to questions or comments toward the end of the show. One of the things that I learned is that sometimes if we try to toggle them through, it gets a little distracting. So let's you and I focus on a couple of the topics today. But first, I want to share the floor with you, and if you would just introduce yourself and let them know who you are and what you do, and I'll do the same. How about that?
Sure, sounds good. I'm Lauren Clayman. I am a licensed master social worker. That is my license here. But what I do is I'm very passionate about caring for people at end of life in hospice. That's where I work and have been doing for quite some time, over 10 years. And so this conversation today has a very special piece of my heart in helping people kind of deal with grief and face loss, and kind of find ways to move through it. So I'm really happy to have a conversation today, and we hope that both of us hope that you will pick something up that's useful for you.
Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things you and I talked about on the phone the other day is loss we can be referring to someone that has transitioned or passed away here recently, but there's a lot of different ways people experience loss. So we're going to hopefully hit on several different angles
Absolutely.
today.
Yeah.
My name is Coach Tonya Wells, and I'm here today as a coach, but also in one of my occupations is I work in mental health. And so I've been working, my goodness, in mental health for a little over 11 years, in addition to my passion for personal growth. And one of the things Lauren and I were also talking about today is pain that is experienced when people go through loss, as well as pain that gets really intensified when we find ourselves thinking and behaving in ways that add to the pain. So hopefully today we'll be able to unpack that a little bit and create some hope, provide support, and help you to think of some things that you had not thought of before. So here we are. And Lauren, one of the things that we were talking about earlier, you had shared that your agency had a presentation that was really tailored around the holidays. And when I saw this one slide that gave some bullet points, which I shared with you, this is what I'd like for us to start walking through a little bit, and we'll see how far we get in the next half hour. But let's give it a shot, and let's go with
Sure. Sounds good.
this first one. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to read the bullet point, and then I'm going to ask you to expound on that a little bit from your take and your lens and your world at hospice, and then I will relay off of that. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Yeah.
Okay. So this first one is one that I absolutely love, and it talks about preparing ahead of time. Preparing. So if someone is anticipating an unpleasant holiday season due to loss, what does this statement mean to prepare ahead of time?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's very interesting. There's a lot of people probably that are looking towards holidays in the future here, even in the next week or so. And they're not feeling so excited about it, right? We talked about that at the beginning of our conversation. And so one of the things we can do, it might look different for you this year. Maybe someone will not be at the table or not be with you this year. Maybe you had some hopes and dreams for this year that kind of never came to fruition. And as you face the end of the year, it just doesn't feel the same to you. So preparation, to me is all about thinking about what it could be like. What are your traditions you've held in the past? And how does it feel for you? So if you think about the way you've always done things, a lot of us have traditions or rituals that we kind of build into our life around the holidays. And so kind of think about each piece of it and ask yourself, how does this feel for me? Does this feel like something that's going to overwhelm me? Or does this feel like something that I can handle this year? And give yourself permission to make adjustments to that. Give yourself permission to say it's okay that this doesn't feel like something I can do this year. But maybe I can, work something in that feels better for me, that feels at a level that I can still maintain kind of my sense of balance and maybe even still find a little bit of joy within the holidays. So it's just kind of thinking about what you've done. How does it feel? And then being willing to allow yourself to create something new if you need to.
Well, I like what you're saying there, and that takes, in order for someone to do that, that would mean that they would need to, let's say a person is really entrenched in their pain and their focus of loss at the moment. It's kind of hard to think ahead, isn't it?
Yeah,
or whatever.
Absolutely.
So whether it be eliciting some help from a loved one, a family member, a support, or an online. There's so many online support tools anymore too. But talking with a friend or something to help create a little bit of space to where they can begin to think ahead. Like you said, they have the family ritual. They kind of have a plan or know of how things flow, and also like what you brought in. How does it feel? Am I getting ready to do excuse me, am getting ready to do A, B, C, and D because that's the way we've always done it? Or am I going to say, you know what, I feel like I can do A and C this year, but I'm going to pass on B. And I'm not really sure if I'm going to fully participate in D. If I'm understanding what you're saying, it's a way to begin to assess and kind of, maybe assess is that's not the right word I'm looking for.
You just kind of step back and look at it, almost as an observer, right? Instead of that active participant, kind of step back as an observer and kind of look at it, for how it feels for you and, what that could look like for you.
There we go. That's it. It's stepping back as an observer, because when we're just emotionally entrenched and focused in the pain, we feel like there's no separation there. Yeah. So it's stepping back and allowing yourself to see what you're thinking and feeling and knowing what's coming down the pike so that you can begin to plan and move in a direction.
Yeah, and it might be easier to have this conversation with someone not kind of attached to it. So, a very safe, trusted friend, or even someone maybe you don't know so well, because they're not going to have that, emotional bias or emotional attachment to perhaps the tradition that you used to do. And so sometimes taking someone a couple steps out, or talking to, a counselor, or just, it could be someone just at church maybe that, or in your community, that just somebody that you're not quite so close with in terms of like being a part of that tradition might be an easier person to kind of bounce your ideas off of. And of course, somebody's safe and that you trust.
Yes. And I'm kind of smiling here because not that it's a fun situation or time, but sometimes you're absolutely right. Getting someone that's maybe outside of the family, because especially if there's so much emotional engagement with the person or the situation that there's loss, because it could be a separation. I know I have a friend of mine that now the holidays are getting ready to, what do they do when the spouse has said, I'm done. There's alcoholism in the home, and I'm separating. I'm moving out. This is a few days before Christmas, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?" Well, the best thing is probably not to talk with another family member that has a strong opinion about particular family members. So I like what you're saying about reaching out for support or getting some feedback from somebody doesn't have any emotional attachment to the situation.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's good. Okay, the second one is acknowledgement and connection. Acknowledgement and connection. What does that mean from your perspective there?
There are a couple of different ones.
Okay.
But, so for me, acknowledgement speaks to kind of looking at it, trying to think of the best way to put this. It's almost giving ourselves permission to like be okay with where we're at. So acknowledging that I don't feel like myself this year, or I don't feel like I'm, everyone says I'm supposed to be happy, but I just don't feel like it this year. And so to me, acknowledgement is just allowing yourself space to say, you know what, this isn't for me this year. But we also need connection.
Right.
Our first, generally speaking, one of our first coping mechanisms when we're feeling not ourselves is to isolate, right? We want to go hide in a hole or be by yourself. And sometimes for a short period of time, that can be what we need. But we are also built for connection. We're built to be with each other. I think that's something we learned very clearly over the last 2 years. As we've kind of been walking through this pandemic, is that we need connection. We thrive on connection, and connection is what helps us to repair and heal too. And there's so many examples of that, in the Bible, if you're a believer. But yeah, we're built for connection. So finding ways to connect. And again, it may not be the same way that you used to. Maybe it's too hard for you to be with, your normal, whoever you consider your family this year, but maybe you can spend some time with somebody else and still maintain that connection. You can also maintain those connections with boundaries too. So, there's I don't know if this is later on our list, but if you can drive your own car if you can somewhere. That way, if you get to a point where you're like, this is too much for me, you can exit kindly and leave. This is all I have for today. But you've still had that connection. You've still made a way for you to be with other people. And, I think that does help repair when we know that we're not alone in something.
Absolutely. And connection is so deep in my heart, because that's what I long to communicate, is not only the need for it, but how to do that. And I love what you're saying, because, when we get into that self-protective mode, when we're experiencing hurt and pain and maybe even some fear of the unknown, let's go back to there's loss in the family due to a separation or divorce, or maybe there's loss and now a spouse is no longer here. And I was speaking with a friend of mine not too long ago. I mean, they were married almost 50 years and so many things that she depended upon. And now this is her first Christmas without her husband. And she really did not anticipate, she wasn't anticipating a painful holiday season. but
Right.
things started coming up that she just wasn't expecting, you know. And so she is looking for ways to connect, and I'm really glad she's reaching out. But I started to say, you have to. One of the things, Lauren, if you haven't learned yet, I get several sentences started, and I will start them, and even
But you always come back. You
I
always
do.
come back.
Okay, good, good, good. So this connection, so we self-preserve, and sometimes that self-preservation comes through isolation. Sometimes that self-preservation comes out with the dukes up, and we just get ugly with our mouth, and we're angry at everybody, and we're yelling at everybody, but we're really fearful. And I heard a writer say one time, I read that the more intense the anger, the greater the fear. So if the anger is really, really strong, and they are really lashing out and argumentative and all this kind of stuff, you can measure the amount of fear that person is experiencing at that moment, you know. And then of course we have the isolation and the withdrawal, and all of that will take away from connection, because we'll either be pushing people away or we will be isolating and we'll be withdrawing, and both are lonely and both are painful,
Yeah.
because we weren't created for that. We weren't created
Absolutely.
for that. So if you're listening, we it may just be a little bit to start, but
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
the suggestion and the hope is that you would begin to realize, may you realize when you begin to isolate and disconnect, that it's the connection that begins to bring the healing and the release from that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think when we isolate, we just feel lonelier and lonelier and
Mm-hmm.
lonelier. And, we can feel alone in a room full of people too.
Sure.
There's one other aspect you mentioned, withdrawal, but sometimes people try and push through too. And
Ah,
so
okay,
they
let's
think
talk
if I
about that.
stay busy enough, then I don't have to
Ah.
think about what's going on. Or I can prove that I'm okay because I'm going to just do it all. I'm going to do all the
Mm-hmm.
things I used to do, but then they wear themselves out. Their energy is
Mm-hmm.
gone, and that can make grief even harder too.
Very, very good point. You're right. Um, I think it sometimes doesn't it start with kind of like an adrenaline and a strength
Right.
that's
Yeah.
there, but then
Then there's like a crash on the other side.
exactly. But
Yeah.
even if it starts with that adrenaline, I hear what you're saying. Then it's almost like, yeah, I need to be strong for the family, or I need to
Hmm.
be strong for this, or whatever the beliefs may be. It becomes produce duty, or more of that dutiful, staying busy,
Right.
and it's nervous energy. It's a nervous heart. It's a disconnected heart in many ways. Maybe they're connecting with their work. Maybe sometimes with the excessive doing, but that's temporary, isn't it? For a
Yeah.
true connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we got to remember that everybody deals with it differently, and to
Mm-hmm.
give people space to react the way they react. It's easy, to look at somebody else and say, well, I've heard families say, when there's multiple kind of different types of coping going on, well, my brother's never here, or he doesn't care because he's not here. He's not
Mm-hmm.
present, or he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even seem bothered by this. But that really doesn't mean that that's the
Mm-hmm.
truth, right? He may have, a brother or a male sometimes may have a different style of coping with
Mm-hmm.
something. Their protection may be to not be near or to not be around the person. Maybe if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's dying, or if someone's going through a hard time or a divorce, it might be uncomfortable for them to be around. And so they cope in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So, also give other people space to cope the way they do
Yeah.
when there's multiple kind of family or friends involved with the loss.
That's true, because there's different dynamics, and things are going on inside of us, and given whatever internally we have as far as coping mechanisms, or faith and trust, it's just on such a variance, isn't it, as
Yeah.
to what internal resources people have, and sometimes we don't even know until we
Yep.
get into that a situation,
Yep.
like that. Anything else you want to say about that one before we move
No.
to another one?
No, let's move on.
Let's look at, I want to jump down to social support. Social support. And maybe we can include in here, and I'm going to hold my thought. I'm going to hold my thought. I want to see what you say first about social supports, and then we'll go from there. So.
Well, I think sometimes we can find our support in unlikely places.
Okay.
So, some places that we may not have thought about before. We may not have thought to look for support. Maybe it's not somebody that we were super close with, maybe in, a friendship or a family role previously. But we might find that we can make a connection on a different level now, based on what we're going through or what somebody else, maybe they've been through the same thing before. So, one of the things that I would encourage is kind of think about who else might be in your network of support, who else might be there. Because, I think different people and different relationships are different things to us. And not one person is going to fulfill, all of our kind of social support needs, right? That is a God thing. He's the only one that, kind of fills all of it. And so, even our spouse isn't going to be everything, or our children or our best friend are not going to be everything for us.
I want us to pause right there because I want you to continue, but let's pause right there. If for those that find themselves, maybe they're targeting one person, or maybe they're on the receiving end of being that one person that seems to, they want all their support to come from this one person. That can be not only a heavy weight, but a person can only do so much.
Right.
And that can get very overwhelming as well when the dependency is just kind of tailored all into one particular person.
Yep.
I'm glad you brought that out, because I have been on that end in thinking that I needed so much from one person that you begin to smother them, and they want to help, but they don't know how to help.
Right.
And they're not meant to be your source, and your life just a support. So I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No, that's okay.
I really wanted to hone in on that. And I don't want anyone to feel guilty if they find themselves moving toward that, to where they're so trying to draw from one person or depend upon one person. If in hearing this today, you're recognizing and seeing that within yourself, no shame in that whatsoever, but begin to see, and what, Lauren, I think where we're going to go next with this is that there are, and you said it actually at the very beginning, sometimes we find our support in unlikely situations or people. And how many times have we experienced when God just seems to bring the right person by at the right time, and it might even be a stranger.
We could say that about ourselves, Tonya, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
That'll be a story for another time, the way we were brought together as friends. But I think sometimes people are placed in our life at the right period of time, but for someone maybe who is, like you said, recognizing them kind of wanting to draw everything from one person, I would first recognize that you have a strength there, that you're willing to step out and reach out for support. Like, that is an awesome thing, because some people won't. So you can, as a social worker, I love to build on strengths. So build on your strengths. Say, hey, I can do this. I know how to reach out to people. Let me see if I can reach out to somebody else, so that I can get some additional support. Because that's a big step. Some people, have a hard time even doing that. There's a lot of offers we get when we're dealing with something difficult in our life, whatever that, type of loss might be. Hey, let me know if you need anything, if I can do anything for you. And many a times we don't reach out for help. So recognize it as a strength first, that, if you are experiencing that, and then give yourself credit for the one work that you're doing, and then know that you can do more.
That's a very, very good point. Very good point. And that even gives me.
All right, I'll let you go now.
No, that's good. Good, good, good. And, I guess also I want to just add to that is about the social supports. I mentioned and I apologize to the audience that I did not have some things already queued up as far as research, but I do know that I've went online to help a client or two here over the last year when it comes to grief and loss, and like there were websites and free resources of like discussion panels and or groups. Now Facebook has so many groups on so
Absolutely.
many different topics. I can't help but think that there are grief and loss and supporting through,
and even more specific than that. I mean, you'll find I've had patients use them, where there's like a Facebook group for someone, like say you're dealing with someone who's experiencing like a terminal illness or just died from some sort of kind of chronic terminal condition. There's groups for like the same age group of the same, relation to the same person, like spouses of, people with this particular type of cancer, right? And so it really helps to, what do they say? There's a Facebook group for everything. So, you may find a community who can relate exactly to what you're going through, whatever that loss may be. That was just one example, but you may find a group for that too.
Well, the resources are out there, and one of the things that I've learned that in any given situation, when we go from being so, and I know pain can blind us sometimes, I get that, but when we are so entrenched and there is no gap between being able to step back and observe, like we were talking about in the first part of that stepping back, being able to recognize, oh my goodness, I am so entrenched and entangled in all this pain, and I'll use the term unnecessary suffering, because we're continuing to loop the thoughts and the things that can just keep us in such misery, to where if we can begin to recognize, I've got to give myself some breathing space here and create some space to where I can step back and begin to really take a look at how I'm thinking and what emotions I just need to let flow, or let go, or whatever it may be, that it begins to open up, we begin to open up to where we can connect with other social supports. It's hard, and maybe this is part of that isolation, or just I don't need anybody, I can do it all by myself kind of attitude, whatever extreme we take. But it's stepping back so that we can be hopeful and even have what word am I looking for? Maybe hopeful is the right word. Maybe not. Maybe we can even move to a neutral spot.
Yeah.
Rather than let's move to a neutral. Sometimes when we're going backwards, here we go. Here's a car. The car analogy for those of us that used to drive a stick shift and still know how. But if I'm going in reverse, I've got to bring the car up into neutral before I can kick it into first and start moving forward. And so if we find ourselves going backwards in this season, our first goal is to get the car or get us moving up into neutral, so we can create a little bit of idleness and separate from the strong emotion that just keeps us looping backwards. Then we can begin to see options, because I truly believe they're always there. We just don't see them because we're blinded by our pain and our fears, and we've turned so inward we can't see them. So
and journaling can be a great way to get into that neutral space too. I'll put that out there. Writing down what you're feeling or thinking, but without judgment. So we don't need to assign, we don't want to put ourselves in a place of shame for feeling what we're feeling, or I shouldn't feel that way. Just writing down what you feel and just kind of letting it go out there, where nobody, not even you, gets to judge it.
I like that. You're right, because then that just shuts down the brain and shuts down the heart.
Right.
Criticism in any shape or form. And we don't need to be doing that to ourselves, do we?
Yeah.
You know?
No.
So that kind of brings into the last point that I wanted to take a look at then tonight, and that's self-care and receiving self-care. So let's hit on that. I'll let you start, and then I'll follow you on that one.
Sure. Yeah. Self-care can be a lot of things, and I think it is very unique, to each individual. But one thing I do know is that self-care should be done on repetition. So self-care is not designed to just be, oh my gosh, when I feel overwhelmed, right? Then I will do something for self-care, right? I'll go get a massage, or go exercise one time, or, something like that. Self-care is meant to be done on repeat. It's, if you think about, I read this analogy once in an article, and it just really struck me. You think about like a fitness routine or working out, there's a balance of workout days and recovery days. And it's just built into the program because that's the way our body is designed. And so, even if you're dealing with grief, build in recovery time. If you're going to spend, an hour this morning, thinking about it, whatever's going on, or,
Right.
kind of moving through your grief, if you're journaling, if you're going to, spend time talking to somebody about it for, an hour over coffee, build in some recovery time for yourself after that, where you can recenter. It can be very emotionally draining to pour out our heart to somebody and explain to them what's going on with us. In fact, it might take a lot out of you for the rest of the day. So self-care can be just not planning anything for later. After, if you're meeting with a therapist after your session, not planning anything later, knowing that I'm going to be physically and emotionally drained from this. So I'm going to build in that self-care. But it's meant to be done on ritual, not just when, you're feeling over the top.
Very, very good point there. And that's something that really could be applied in every area of,
Yes.
our life is
anything, yeah.
isn't it, right?
Yeah.
That ebb and flow. But I like that. So it's being intentional about creating some margin, some space, because you really don't know what a get together with a family with the family might mean, or so again, we're talking about like thinking ahead, getting ahead, and kind of forecasting, so to speak, possibility. Because otherwise, we're left to just kind of reacting to every feeling that starts coming up, or every interaction that triggers something. Then we're feeling probably more out of control and just kind of bouncing around like in a pinball machine.
Yeah. Visualize it. Visualize, hey, what could go wrong, or how might I feel afterwards? So then you can set up a contingency plan for that.
Right. But wow, so self-care, what would be just some practical things as it relates to self-care? I know we had talked about, you mentioned like the massage, or maybe even talking with a friend or a therapist or something like that as well. But
there's always the basics. We should always be trying to, eat healthy, right? Get some rest, keep moving. But on top of that, it's really anything that fills our cup, anything that, it could be listening to music for somebody. It could be being with somebody, like being around people, but it could also be being alone. Alone isn't bad. I know we talked about social connection, but, being alone isn't bad. Maybe being alone and reading a book is refueling for you. It brings you a state of peace and a state of joy. It could be being in nature. Nature can be very grounding, especially if you get out there and you listen to all the things that you can hear, and let layers kind of fall off, and recenter yourself by thinking about, what do I hear? I hear the wind, or I feel the wind on my face, and I hear the birds. And the more you break down those layers, sometimes that can be very refreshing to the soul. So it's kind of about learning what's refreshing to you, and you can try different things. There's all kinds of lists. If you look it up online for self-care, but try some and see what speaks to you. So you could kind of build them into your routine, but also know that it might change based on the season of life you're in.
That's true.
I used to really enjoy running, but then this summer I felt like I was refueled by walking. And so, different seasons may bring different things for us.
So true. So true, because life changes and different things change. And I think what I'm hearing you say, there, and I believe this too, there are numerous options, and all those options are there. It's just, where is our sight? Are we willing? Are we in that neutral spot, desiring to move forward? And if so, I believe these options begin to appear, and we begin to connect with them. And you're right, we get to try different things out. We get to try, we start journaling, and maybe journaling works for a season. And I say works, that's not what I mean. But
maybe it feels good. Yeah.
Maybe it feels good at the time, or maybe we started and it just doesn't seem to fit. Okay, lay it down and go take a walk. I love the mindfulness walks, just where you're letting go and you're present with what you're doing, whether it be in your neighborhood or a park or somewhere like that, just where you really are allowing yourself to take a break from all the stressors and everything.
Well, and when we bring our mind to focus on other things, like I talked about, like what's going on in nature around us, it moves our brain to a different place. And so we have to let go of maybe those thoughts that are circling round and round and round in our head, because we're focused. We're focused on trying to find those things. If you walk the same route every day, you could try and find one new thing on your route every day, so that your brain is scanning, it's looking. And again, the more you do things like that, you're kind of laying down maybe some of those losses that you just keep spinning over and over and over in your head, and giving yourself a break from that for a little while. It doesn't go away, but they're just, they're kind of shelved for a little while.
Well, they are. And what I have found, that the more I take my focus off of them and allow myself just to be present with the moment and what I'm engaged with, the answers and the things that I need resolved begin to come effortlessly, rather than me trying to strive to fix something or get an answer or get resolve. I think one of the most painful questions that a lot of people ask, and I think you and I mean, we've both been raised in church and been in church for a lot of time, and we both have heard, people crying out and asking God why, and the why questions they're asking are very painful questions, and it's coming from a place of a sense of separation, and so much Scripture promises that He's walking through with us in all these different situations. And so it's really coming back to that place of remembrance. And I want to, as didn't realize, but we're already at we're over half an hour, more than I anticipate. But this has been good, and I hope you've been enjoying this. Lauren,
I just want to share one more thought about what you were saying before you close up.
No.
When we're thinking about like the Scripture and everything, I want to say that God can handle it. If you read in the Psalms, that they can be so comforting to someone who's going through a difficult time in their life. Read how David poured it all out in front of God, and told him, hey, how long can I handle this anymore? It feels like I'm really beaten down, and He can handle it. He can handle all of it. He proved that on the cross, but He's here with us. And so I don't think we need to be afraid to bring our questions.
Right.
And to lay them down. So.
Yeah. Yes. No, we don't have to be afraid of our questions. Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. I think I was just coming.
Oh, no, I wasn't saying that to you. I was just saying that to other people out there. Yeah.
Yeah. No. That's fine. I didn't know if I was coming across clear.
No.
So, because I don't want to be insensitive. Again, I just want folks that, I want them to see when they're creating more pain, unnecessary. Again, I'll go back to that unnecessary pain, by asking questions that they can just beat and beat and beat the drum to that, and they won't get an answer.
Yeah.
But there are so many other questions God wants to answer and be a support to them as they're walking through these things.
Yeah. There's one word that you use a lot with me, that's surrender, right?
Yes.
And
There's
I
nothing.
think this is a good spot for that, right?
Nothing less
Surrender.
than that. Nothing less than that. So today we hit on, I'm going to recap the
Awesome.
points we hit today. Today we talked about preparing ahead of time, thinking, being able to create that space and get out ahead so that you're not always reacting to everything that begins to happen through the holidays. You're able to separate and see, okay, what do I feel like I can really engage in? What do I need to just set out of this year? What can I do? What do I feel like I really don't want to do? And move through that. Another thing we talked about was acknowledgement, acknowledging how we are feeling and how we are handling it right now at this moment. And the purpose of and the need for connection, to be careful that we don't isolate to the point where we're disconnecting ourselves from others, or we're coming up and we're fighting everybody, so we're pushing everybody away. Another thing we talked about was reaching out for social support, and that there are so many things, especially now with the internet and groups and things like that. So if you say, okay, well, I don't have family or friends, then probably more than not, you're online. And so there are ways to connect with different Facebook groups or online. Sometimes if you just search it, you will find websites and things that have support as well. But your local church, your friends and family, there are different folks, new friends. Don't be surprised if you gain some new friends. Another thing that we talked about then was self-care and receiving self-care. Sometimes people genuinely do want to be a support and help, but for some reason we have difficulty in letting good come in. I really believe that's probably one of the biggest resistance that we have as human beings, is allowing good to come in. And we look at the situation and we think, well, this isn't good. Well, no, I didn't say the situation was good, but there's so much goodness that wants to come in. And sometimes people are very sincere when they want to help you, or they want to help another. Maybe you're watching today and you're one of the helpers. Maybe some of the things that we talked about today, because people are reacting and they're interacting with grief and loss in different ways. It's going to be different for everybody. But how can we be a genuine support? And if you're one that needs support, being willing to receive that support.
Yeah.
So I think we covered some really good
stuff
here tonight.
Good stuff today.
Good stuff. Well, I appreciate you, Lauren. I appreciate you hanging out with me a little bit. I think we will come back and we'll do some more. I was looking in the chat box. I didn't see anyone post any questions or chats, so we will just take that as a wrap, and we'll get ready to roll off, and we'll be back.
Thanks so much.
Again,
Bye.
next time. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to our Higher Way Live tonight on a support for those who are dreading or maybe having some anticipation toward the holidays. Hope this was of help to you. I will load this video on YouTube. It'll be made available tomorrow on my YouTube channel, Coach Tonya Wells. Check it out when you can, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.